Good morning. It's my pleasure to begin today's webinar. On behalf of the entire Fort Meade Alliance Board of Directors, welcome to the forum, Solving the Cyber Workforce Shortage. I'm Doreen Harwood, President of the Fort Meade Alliance, and I had the pleasure of serving on the steering committee alongside community leaders from all sectors in our region to develop the white paper that we're here to talk about. A programming note: we're recording today's webinar and we'll post it on the FMA website shortly after this session. If you have a friend or colleague who you think should hear our conversation, please share it with them once it's posted. As I'm sure many of you in the audience are aware, the demand for cybersecurity professionals far outnumbers the supply in this region and across the nation. Here in Maryland, even though we have one of the nation's highest geographic concentrations of cybersecurity professionals, on any given day, we still have over 22,000 open positions to fill. And filling them makes a difference in terms of our nation's ability to defend itself from cyber threats. As we've seen time and time again, our networks and systems are susceptible to bad actors carrying out cyber attacks. In our own backyard, from the ransomware that held Baltimore City hostage to a similar circumstance that led to Baltimore County Public Schools to close for nearly a week, we can clearly see the need for professionals who can help defend our nation's critical infrastructure and systems against these attacks. We are here today to share the five top challenges in acquiring cybersecurity IT talent, CSIT talent, in our region, as spelled out by the white paper published by the Fort Meade Alliance, as well as to share the potential solutions identified by the steering committee and the working groups that supported this effort. During our keynote and panel today, you are invited to be part of this conversation. Please ask questions and provide comments through the Zoom Q&A that for most of you will be a feature at the bottom left hand of your screen. We will do our best to respond to everyone. Now, without further ado, let's kick off our event. I want to welcome our keynote speakers for today. The first, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, President of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Throughout his distinguished career, Dr. Hrabowski has accumulated a number of awards and accolades, including being named one of America's 10 best college presidents and one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Most recently, he received the American Council on Education's Lifetime Achievement Award and was named recipient of UC Berkeley's Clark Kerr Award for distinguished leadership in education, in higher education. Joining him today is Dr. Maurice Mann, our own Deputy Superintendent for Academics and Strategic Initiatives for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. By the way, the 38th largest school system in the United States. Together, they will discuss the primary challenge identified by the steering committee in acquiring CSIT talent in the Fort Meade region. That challenge is building diversity. Dr. Hrabowski, Dr. McMahon, over to you.
Thank you, Doreen. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here again with you, Dr. Hrabowski. I'm excited. I wanted to start by saying many times I've heard you speak about acquiring new STEM talent, but you don't talk about traditional recruitment. You talk about seeing differently, thinking about the pool differently, and thinking about locating and nurturing talent that is very different than the traditional folks that are in the STEM pipeline. And I'm wondering if you want to speak more to that.
Sure, and I'm going to ask that we be as informal as possible, Maureen and Freeman, okay?
Thank you very much.
We know each other well. Let me just say that this region is so rich with talent of two types. You have so many students who come to UMBC and other institutions, the community colleges, who have backgrounds and homes where somebody is already involved in computing. they're working at the agency and other places, and that gives those young people an advantage. It does. When you see a parent or a relative already working from military to defense or whatever, then you get even more interested. You understand how the computing skills can help with the job and with your life. And then we have many talented kids who have not had those privileges, who have not been in the home either that's been educated or that has any background in computing. And first, they don't know what the possibilities are. And second, there are academic skills they need to develop. We see those in school systems around the country, and that's the achievement gap that we talk about.
Right.
And what surprises people is when I say as a mathematician, we need children who can read well and think critically, because whether you're talking about solving a problem in physics or chemistry or mathematics or engineering or broadly in cybersecurity, problems are expressed in words.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's so important to be able to think through and understand the words. And you go from there to using your technical skills,
Yes.
from algebra, calculus, whatever, and the computing skills. And so I would say that what we have to think about is how to make our best even better to compete with people around the world, and how to take all these talented children who have not had that academic preparation or the family background to get them to that point with the school system and take them in different directions to get involved in computing. And we can talk about a lot of those options and tracks.
Right. And whether or not it's in the K-12 sector or community college or beyond, or even when they get in the workforce,
Yes.
how do we get others to see that it's never too late? Whether it's the person themselves or whether it's the people around them.
Sure. I want to put in the plug for our wonderful teachers. I want to make sure that teachers have exposure to the possibilities for their students and for themselves, and not necessarily just your STEM teachers. That's one difference, because a number of the STEM teachers are already somewhat involved in technology, but we can get people in across the disciplines and give them training that can be very helpful. When I think about data science, for example, and the fact that at UMBC we are working with colleagues across the curriculum because many of the big problems involving data involve the social sciences, for example, right? When we think about public health and different kinds of issues. And so what we've got to get school systems and universities thinking about is that technology is across the board. Whether we're talking about cyber or AI, or we're talking about data science, that we need more people, many more people than have thought of themselves as STEM people involved in the process. So I want to say something about the teachers who are with so many skills and can support and help students to understand, to open their eyes to the possibilities. I also want to talk about what we do to give families and students options. You know, I am very proud to be at a research university. We're producing about a third of the IT graduates, bachelors in the state of Maryland. Very proud of that. But I also know we have a training company, and there are other efforts out UMBC training centers where we take students who have been veterans, who may have had a degree in humanities and want to get into technology, and they can go through these certificate programs. And the name of the game has to be what Jim Collins calls the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. It's not just a straight route through college, 2-year and 4-year. It's going through training programs, it's community colleges, it's 4-year institutions, it's certificate programs and badges. We've got to think more broadly about how you give students certain skills to get them into the work. And then the idea of constantly learning. You get a certain set of skills, you begin working, you keep going to school, you keep doing things, whether remotely or in person, to build your skills and to keep stacking so that you can move on to get that bachelor's if you want, or other degrees. And so let's broaden our thinking about the tracks and pathways to getting into computing.
And sometimes I think to myself, along with the pathways, what's in those pathways?
Yes.
I think sometimes people stack up the academics and then they wait for the authentic, amazing, exciting problems.
Yes.
And sometimes I think maybe we can switch that up.
No, it's an excellent point. And you know this from your background in STEM education. Hands-on experiences, internships, practical experiences, research experiences, really important. UMBC is very proud to be very connected to the National Security Agency. And we're talking about over 1,100 of my graduates going there. It's really cool to go and work at the agency, right? And I get a chance to go up and speak and to give talks. General Nakasone has me there, and they are very involved with diversity, very much so. He's committed to that. And I tell you that for this reason. I think about some of our students who began working at NSA in high school.
Absolutely.
And so when they come to UMBC, they've already had experiences, and they're very, very careful about what they say about where they work. They might say defense or whatever. But what is interesting is two things are happening. When you start students in high school and the early years of college, they mature more. I am always impressed with the military and how you take a 17-year-old and that person becomes somebody responsible for protecting our country. There's something noble about that. And that's a part of what I want to say about this region, that we must teach people who are not involved with defense and intelligence in the military, that for all of us, it is noble work to think about protecting our country in so many ways. And there's so many ways to do it. When you think about school systems that may be hacked, you think about an entire city that can be hacked, you think about ways in which other countries come in and work with our electoral system. The fact is that we should be very proud that we have the strength to protect ourselves, and we need much more, many more people. And we need to give students the opportunities while they're young, whether they're 15 or 16, 18, 19, 20, and to think through how computing can help them solve big problems, interesting problems, and to give them jobs. And on the other hand, we've got millions of people in this state who started at a community college or a four-year institution, who never got a degree, and they've had the experience of life. And we need to give them opportunities in a coherent fashion to come back and learn much more and get a certificate or a degree so they can better themselves and help us with the economy and with all the challenges that we face. So we've got to go think, again, the genius of the and. It's returning adults. It's people who may have a degree and don't have a job. It's people who are fascinated by computing and want to get into it. It's younger people, high school and college, who can go in any of these different directions.
And no matter who that person is along that life track,
yes,
oftentimes, I mean, and under your leadership at UMBC, the mentor role,
yes,
the notion of what your faculty members and others have done.
Yes,
people need guides. They need mentors.
It's so true, Maureen. I have a TED Talk called, and the two things that the TED Talk is called 4 Pillars of Success in Science and College Science. And some people get upset because I start by saying, unfortunately, in colleges, we weed out so many students. We call the first year or two of science weed out courses. And that's just not for students who have a good background. Sometimes it's for students who have perfect scores. And I mean, at all kinds of institutions. And often the more prestigious the university, the greater the chance the student will leave STEM. It's a real issue. And it has to do with mindset. Mindset, as we talk about. That is that if we start by saying, we're going to make sure these students succeed, it makes a difference. I like to say, many people who went to college heard somebody say, look at the student to your left, look at the student to your right, one of you will not graduate. That's a terrible thing to say, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I'm at all an immature kid, I'm saying, oh God, he's talking about me, so I may as well have a good time because I'm not going to be here, right? We said, look at the student to your left, look at the student to your right. Our goal is to make sure all 3 of you graduate. And if you don't, we fail also, and we don't plan to fail. We believe in you. So mindset about our students is very important. And then the other point I make in the TED Talk is it takes professionals to bring professionals into the work. You don't do it on your own. And that's whether you're talking about an artist or a computer scientist or a science person. You've got to have somebody to move you along in that path and to give you support and honest feedback and critical suggestions of how you can be better. And when you get knocked down, to help you get back up. And so we need the mentors. I like to say the advocates or the champions who can help you all along the way. And we've had great mentors from a variety of companies. Northrop Grumman is one of our big partners, for example, and they work with us in the schools and in a STEAM center in the inner city, for example. And you've got engineers who go over there to give support. We're working with them on those math and reading skills as we move towards the computing. Or you think about what NSA does with us and others in coding for girls,
right?
Because it's the diversity. It's about kids of color. It's about women. You know this, that only about 20% of all computer science majors are women right now. Right. We've got many more women in chemistry and math than in computer science. And we're working on that. That's across the country. We've moved our numbers up some, but still we can all do much better to get more women into these fields and to get people of color of all types, Black, Latinx, and others into these fields. I'd like to upset Americans by saying some of our competitive countries do a much better job in getting more women into computing. When I look at the number of women from Russian background who are in computing, it's amazing. Who come to this country, you see, and it's cultural. It's cultural that it's just understood that people, men and women, will get into computing and do much more. We don't do that here. So mindset with families to say, get your girls to get into this also, and people of color. It's very important.
Well, I think to myself, over the years, over the last couple of decades, we've really moved women into the life sciences and the social sciences in larger numbers, which has been great.
Yes.
But if we look to the people in our schools in America, our teaching staff, predominantly in elementary schools, are women.
Yes.
And they're women who didn't necessarily love mathematics.
Yes.
And so it's a challenge to move girls into math.
Yes.
If other women who are the role models, they often are not confident. It's not that they're turning children off. I just don't think they're necessarily turning children on.
And so that's why I think our teachers are so important. Our teachers and our families are so important, because we will tell families do this all the time of all races. They would say, well, he's good in math and she's good in English.
Right.
Well, I want to say they're good in both. They can do both. My mama was a math and English teacher, right? So I grew up with both. And I love poetry. I love literature, but I get goosebumps doing math. When I go into a 3rd or 4th grade class and I tell the kids, I get goosebumps. They look at me like I'm crazy at first, but then we start working word problems, and children will pick up that enthusiasm if you have it, right? So we need to support our families and our teachers in these efforts, and in concrete ways to get more of our students, starting the upper levels of high school at least, all the way through college, community colleges, working in companies. Because what many people don't know is how much a 16 or 17 or 19 or 20-year-old can do. NSA gets that. They get that. And there's some others, but we can learn from what they do. We really can.
So I think to myself, when we're talking about cyber, we are talking about that person who thinks differently, and that whole well-rounded person. It's not just about math. Right? So if you were saying to a young person who's thinking, wow, in my backyard, there are cyber jobs.
Yes.
What would you tell them if they were coming into the university now?
Well, we're lucky to have 100+ companies on campus, biotech and IT, and many are one of the largest concentrations of cyber companies. And that includes women and people of color who are CEOs. And so giving students chances to see what the work is all about and to understand how they can use their skills in protecting others. Well, and that what we're talking about in cyber goes to all parts of our society and of human condition. It's like when we talk about the Internet of Things. I mean, it's the idea that it's everywhere. It's everything we have. And clearly what comes through is that people who want to work in hospitals, or who want to work in defense, or who want to work in a financial institution, wherever you go, there's this need to protect our data. And the idea that we can give students the skills to know how to think critically and the specific computational skills that can lead them to be very important in an organization is something we have to get across. And one of the ways we do that is by giving them examples, having people in to speak who are working in companies, to give them direct examples of what they do and how they do it and what their journey has been. One of the secrets that shouldn't be a secret is that if you're going to major in computer science and in information systems, you have to do well in a first calculus course. And it may sound like a simple requirement, but you'd be surprised how many students come in and are not able to do well in that course and have to retake it. So that calculus background, that foundation is very important. It's a critical thinking approach to the work. And the other part would be knowing what the options are. So for us, for example, you've got people in computer engineering, computer science, information systems, business technology, and then you've got people in computational areas across other disciplines like geographic information systems. So there are all these possibilities, but you've got to know, students have to know what skills they need to get into those upper level courses. And that's why I say the math is important, the reading and thinking skills are important, and then practice with coding and getting involved. And that's why kids who are in homes where parents are doing it all the time have such an advantage. And that's why I think we need many more. We should be a corridor that has coding going on everywhere. For our girls, for little boys, for kids of color, it should be, and for our teachers, right? You know, even when you think about, it's not cyber, but the hackathons, and we do a lot of 24-hour hackathons, and we have statewide competitions and people from other countries, and from other states. And what you see is it's often 80-90% men, white and Asian. You don't see kids of color, and these are my wonderful white and Asian males, but they understand we need to try to get more women into it, more Blacks and Latinx into it, and we've got to specify and pull those kids into the work too, because there's a kind of enthusiasm that goes with this. You know, we were the 2017 National Cyber Champions. Our team is called the Cyber Dogs. And that was that next year we played UVA and won in the basketball, and UVA that next morning beat us in cyber. Right? So people always say, which one is better, being the national cyber champions or beating the #1 team in the country? And I say, well, for visibility, it's the basketball, but we ought to get to the point where everybody's celebrating when we're the national cyber champions. We've been winning a lot of regional championships. We've gotten to the finalists in the national, haven't quite got back there yet, but it should be something that everybody's talking about.
Right.
We ought to have the cyber dogs.
You often talk about being the university where it's cool to be smart. But you acknowledge, you know what? STEM is hard work. But it's okay for it to be hard work.
For it to be hard work. You know what? And we all have to learn. So I've even gotten away from the word smart so much, because sometimes if you got the smart kids here, then what's it telling everybody else? And so what I've heard that I really like from my colleagues at University of Pennsylvania and Stanford is the idea of we want people with grit.
Fair enough.
Because even if the kid, boys, often are not as serious in the 9th and 10th grade, they get better and they get more mature in the 11th and 12th. Girls mature faster than boys, whether we want to realize it or not. Not always, but often, right? And so what we talk about is where's the grit? Where's the grit? The name of our Chesapeake Bay Retriever, our mascot, is True Grit. All right. And we call UMBC the House of Grit. And the idea is the hard work, the resilience, never giving up, the right attitude, listening to advice, and always saying, I need help. That's one of the big issues in STEM in general. People have to be willing to take help and to work in groups. So because when we talk about our cyber dogs, for example, our award-winning team of cyber experts, they work in a group on problems. When we talk about the hackathons, they work in groups. When people go into companies, they learn. I'm on boards at T. Rowe and McCormick, and you see people working in groups all the time on all the problems. We've got to teach students that you build your skills, you have the grit, and you learn how to work as a team to get something, how to ask good questions, but how to listen and take advice and get knocked down and get back up. Grit is a word we should be using.
That's important. That notion of persistence.
Yes.
Past where you think you can go.
Yeah, and you keep going. I will tell you, more than half of my new students have a parent from another country. It always surprises people. These are American kids, but their parents either are military or from the intelligence, or a lot of people come to the Baltimore-Washington corridor to work in the national institutes here, and a number of them, these kids, or whether they're in Anne Arundel, Howard, Baltimore, wherever they are, they've got one parent. And now, why do I tell you that? If you look at the highest achieving STEM-oriented Americans throughout the 20th century, often they came from a family where somebody had come from another country, often European in the 20th century, out of New York. We talk, you just think about all the people who migrated here from Europe, and then their parents, right? Or grandparents. What did they have? Hunger, determination. I got to this country, greatest country in the world. I got to make sure my kids work really hard. And that has been, so I want that idea of we are proud to be Americans and to defend our country. It's a big part of what we say when we think about the defense, intelligence, military, but also all of our society. Attitude matters.
Well, I thank you, Dr. Hrabowski. It's been such a pleasure, and I know that the Fort Meade Alliance just owes you a debt of gratitude for your leadership over the years, but actually for this conversation today.
Thank
Back to Doreen Harwood.
Well, thank you both for such an energizing conversation. Very thought-provoking, and with regard to the topic you were discussing, which was really how we take advantage of diversity in the largest description, the largest definition. I keep going back to your statement, Dr. Rabowski, about the genius of the and.
Yes.
So it's not about two choices, it's how we get to the maximum population, cast the largest net in order to bring the best and brightest into cybersecurity and information technology to fill this gap. How can we all get away from the or and get to the and?
Yes, exactly.
Just excellent, excellent. So thank you both for your conversation and for being part of today's event. Now we're going to take a moment to watch a short video that outlines the findings of the white paper. I ask everyone who's online to please stick with us. Following that, we're going to have our panel discussion.
On any given day in the Fort Meade region, more than 22,000 cybersecurity jobs go unfilled. And the situation is not getting better. Jim Allen, Executive Vice President of Booz Allen Hamilton, describes the consequences of that chronic shortfall when he says, quote, "I'm trying to avoid over-dramatizing this, but I would say we're in a crisis as a nation. We see media reports every day of some breach, hack, or intrusion that could disrupt businesses, medical systems, financial systems, national infrastructure. A contributing factor to that situation is our dearth of skilled professionals to both prevent and defend against activities by malicious actors." The Fort Meade Alliance gathered a team of experts in cybersecurity and workforce development to dissect the factors undermining this vital mission. Following months of deep discussions and research, the steering group pinpointed 5 core challenges to expanding the cyber workforce. Our current cyber workforce clearly shows the impact of systemic inequalities in education and job training opportunities. When looking at Baltimore City, African American students make up just 9% of the STEM classes. Women still comprise just 11% of the U.S. cyber workforce. And most students from lower income families never land a career in cyber. FMA President Doreen Harwood shares her newfound realization.
The diversity discussion was the first aha moment in the steering committee's work. You assume when children enter first grade that all children from all communities have an equal chance of expanding their minds and pursuing their interests. That's not the case. It was a shocker to me to realize the breadth and depth of the problem.
Grade schools lack sufficient teachers in STEM fields. They lack sufficient IT and cyber educational resources. And schools need additional support for guidance counselors so they can help more students pursue cyber careers. Maureen McMahon, Deputy Superintendent of Anne Arundel County Public Schools, says, quote, "Our teachers don't have to be experts in cyber to motivate the next group of cyber professionals, but they have to be knowledgeable enough to tell stories. Teachers need to be familiar with the range of careers, whether that is risk tolerance, software analysis, data analytics, or languages. Then they can educate and guide and inspire students." Some of the most promising technical minds in grade school are nowhere close to a cyber career path. They are talented, engaged gamers, coders, and robotics fans. But they don't excel academically, and they won't qualify for a cyber career without targeted, innovative support. Jack Terry, Vice President of Leidos, says failure to tap into that talent is depriving the cyber industry of great workers. He says, quote, "We are missing out on maybe 30% of our potential workforce because contract or hiring requirements are too high or too rigid. The industry needs to open the aperture a little so we can start engaging and developing some of that untraditional talent base." To launch a cyber career, work experience is both essential and difficult to obtain. Some entry-level cyber jobs require up to 5 years of previous experience, but internships, apprenticeships, and other work experiences are scarce and restricted to a narrow band of students. FMA Education and Workforce Chair Penny Cantwell.
By its nature, cybersecurity is a very fluid activity and the professional requirements keep evolving. So to grow the workforce, we have to build more bridges between education and industry, both to keep the training current and to expand opportunities to get critical workforce experience.
Historically, the tech industry has focused on hiring cyber workers with degrees, certifications, and experience. That practice has discouraged or excluded many capable individuals, including non-traditional learners, low-income individuals, diverse populations, career changers, and transitioning military. Kirkland Murray, President and CEO at Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation, insists the industry needs to create more pathways to a cyber career. He says, quote, "There are bright students who have gone through IT or the Homeland Security program at Meade High School who aren't going to college. There are adult learners and career changers and people transitioning out of the military who have skills and potential but no degrees. We need to map out paths and create opportunities for those people to pursue IT careers." At the Fort Meade Alliance, we take our mission seriously. We believe part of our mission includes helping our partners in industry, government, education, and the community overcome those challenges so that together we can expand the cyber workforce and defend the homeland.
For the second part of our program, I would like to introduce Jack Cherry, Vice President and Deputy Operations Manager at Leidos. Jack also served as a member of the steering committee that developed the white paper. Over to you, Jack.
Good morning. A week ago today, on February 16th, the FMA convened a set of working groups to further discuss the challenges and potential solutions for them. With representatives from K through 12 and higher education, as well as participants from our FMA partners and members, the groups identified additional methods to address these challenges. Joining us today are the facilitators of our 3 working groups. Shana Cosgrove, founder, owner, and CEO of Nyla Technology Solutions. Kirkland Murray, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation. And Lisa Ferran, Project Director, Program Manager of the Signature Program Support Team in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I'd like to thank each of you for your work facilitating last week's and presenting today. To get our panel started, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to share the specific challenge your group tackled. Lisa, can you get us started? What challenges did your group address, and what were some of the main takeaways from the conversation?
Jack, our group was focused on the challenge number 2, which is aligning the K through 12 education with the development of cyber skills. We identified a number of barriers, many of which were referred to by Dr. Rabowski, but not only the barriers, but we discussed a lot of ways that we can get around those barriers. That was really the takeaway for me. But a number of things that were brought up by the group, that students need access to the technology and education of the industry, and they do not have that up-to-date technologies in their classroom. So that's one of the barriers that was discussed. Diversity, not just for diversity's sake, but for including all students. The challenge for a 16-year-old to get into an internship or to get that workforce experience is often difficult, along with something as simple as transportation issues that students are unable to get back and forth to an opportunity. And one of the discussions was the awareness of students, of educators, of families as to the benefits of getting into the cyber industry. The many places that students could find themselves, as was discussed in the keynote. Not all kids are taking that direct path. So we have a lot of things to overcome, but a lot of willingness to do that. So the takeaway for the group was that we really need a long-term collaborative strategic plan for a pipeline of pre-K, getting those kids earlier into that thinking, pre-K through high school and into post-secondary opportunities. And it's not just a one-time exposure for students, that it needs to be something that is continuously put in front of them for that grit to persist and to succeed.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Shana, can you tell us which challenge your group discussed and the key takeaways? Sorry, Shana, you're on mute.
Classic. Our main challenge was harnessing natural IT talent. So there is a large population of individuals who might be very willing to go into these fields. They understand that it is a good field. They don't know where to start. They don't know anyone who does it, and they're not sure that they can transition. So even those who do go, even those who are qualified, the students, so even if we're getting them prepared, only about 50% are prepared, and then only about 10% actually do complete the degree. So some of the things we talked about was finding those people who are non-traditional. A very common example that we've talked about is veterans. We're finding enlisted veterans are coming out. They're very interested in transitioning to either becoming part of the cyber workforce, becoming a system administrator, and perhaps even transitioning to software or data science, but they're not sure where to start outside of the clear example of getting a degree. There's always getting back to that, getting a degree. Another really common example is people who really want to transition from their current position. So there's plenty of people who go to college and they do a career field and they want to change. And Dr. Hrabowski gave that example of even teachers sometimes want to go into the field from being teachers. So what is that transition into the workforce if you are already an experienced individual but need some really specific training? Another example that we have is one of the challenges is pre-COVID was an expectation that to perform at work, you had to be on site. And another assumption that we make consistently is that working in this field requires full-time, 40-hour-a-week satisfaction. There's very few discussions of job splitting or accepting people at a smaller portion so that they can also support their personal needs. And given that lack of perceived flexibility, I can't go on site, right? It doesn't work for my life for me to go on site, but I could work 25, 30 hours a week. And if we're able to break that down and provide a greater sense of flexibility, not a sense, actual flexibility for people, we might be able to attract an extremely large number of people to that. And the other major thing that we said was a challenge was continued perception of stereotypes. And not just that there are a large number of white males, but when we were talking about who should we attract into IT, it was an assumption of people who play with robotics more versus the example of someone who also likes poetry. So someone who's excelling in English does not prevent you from also being great. And so it's this stereotype of someone who is very narrowly focused is also an assumption that you are not going to be good and that you cannot be a well-rounded person and exist. That is removing people from thinking that this is a field for them.
Thanks, Jana. And last but not least, Kirk, tell us a bit about your group. As I understand it, you discussed the remaining challenges. Can you share a bit with us about those challenges and that conversation?
Good morning, Jack, and good morning, everyone. Yes, we talked about the last two challenges, about the work experience, building work experiences to degrees, and the pathways. So When we first started, we picked up on the main conversation about diversity and the need to bring in a more diverse workforce. And what we heard from a lot of our members in our group, especially from industry, that this is a priority for them, that they are setting up programs within their companies to attract a more diverse workforce. They feel that this diverse workforce not only bring opportunities to those communities, but also bring innovation and a different perspective to how to solve a problem that they're trying to solve for their client. Then we went into a long conversation about especially from the DoD standpoint and some of the requirements that the agency and other federal agencies and put on the contractors about the years of experience, that many of the entry-level positions require 5 years of experience. And how can you do that? How can you help people build that experience? Especially if you're trying to connect back to that diverse workforce or trying to grow your pipeline of skilled workers. How do you achieve that? So we talked about that. There are several programs that many companies have already set up with, looking at Lockheed Martin and some other companies have set up apprenticeship programs. They have other programs that increase internships. One of the positive things that came from our conversation is the willingness that now when we're looking at internships, we're going a little bit deeper than just college internships. We're looking at internships for people who are in community colleges. We're looking at even creating internships at the high school level to increase that pipeline and get people those skills. Again, those conversation came about some of the challenge of the labor categories there, that zero tolerance for experience and education. So we had to look at how do we get people that experience going forward. So one of the positive things that were coming out of this is that industry recognized these problems and they're already starting to solve some of these problems. I think we just need to come together and share more and look at how we can increase those opportunities for additional work experience, either through internships, through on-the-job training, through apprenticeships. And then lastly, that last category about building pipelines and building a career pathway and looking at new ways that we can show people how to build those career pathways and what those career pathways are. How do you start at a certain point and move up? And definitely having the conversation that we mentioned from our panelists about our keynote speakers on mentorships and having strong mentorships as part of that career pathway. So it was a very lively conversation. We ran out of time, but we hit on a lot of those key points.
Thanks, Kirk. So Kirk, you mentioned diversity. One of the common themes throughout the groups was a discussion of diversity. I think our audience today would be interested to hear your perspective on the importance of building diversity as we build the cyber workforce. Is this something your groups found important? And if so, why? I guess I'll start with Shana and then we can kind of work backwards.
I'm muting myself because the dog in the background, but I think diversity is incredibly important at minimum because our current efforts to attract talent are not working, right? So if you look at a simple data perspective, what we're doing today is not meeting our current need and is definitely not projected to meet our future need. So we are in a crisis and we see a looming crisis. So it calls for doing something different than the way we've currently done. The other really important thing is we've seen a lot of system failures due to not having enough different viewpoints. So if you have everyone who comes from the same background, educated in the same way, same socioeconomic ideas, you tend not to think differently. And the diversity of thought and the diversity of perspective leads to better outcomes. And really just focused on pure data, there are companies that have a larger diverse leadership are more profitable. And that translates also to, from our perspective, we're not focused on profit. When we're talking about government contracting, we're really focused on mission outcomes. And there's no question, the more you have larger diversity, you're really thinking about solving that mission.
Thanks. Lisa, how about you?
Well, I can echo several of the things that Jana just said that our group also brought up. In Anne Arundel County Public Schools, we've been focusing on diversity for a number of years now, for every aspect of our system, from teacher hiring to student opportunities. And so diversity is very important. But one of the things that the group brought up, our industry partners brought up, is just what Shana said, the diversity of thinking that's necessary to do the problem solving. We haven't been able to really grasp that, that idea. It's not just about the age diversity or the race or the gender diversity, but it is that thinking, diversity of thinking. And a lot of that does depend on where you come from, what your belief systems are, and we have to capture those people to have that can talk about things that they may disagree about, but can do so in a respectful and a collaborative and productive way. So that diversity of thinking leads to those discussions and to those problem solving skills that our students need. And that's where our industry partners are so important to us, because they recognize that, and we need to reinforce that into our students in our classrooms, through our classrooms.
Great, thanks. Kirk, I know you mentioned a few elements of diversity in your conversation. Was there anything else you wanted to share?
Well, one of the biggest takeaway is one of the company members said, if you're not thinking about diversity, you're crippling yourself. So I think business to grow and business to succeed, they have to think about diversity and diversifying their workforce for all the reasons that we just discussed.
Great, great.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Shana.
I wanted to add one more thing. I think I was working with someone talking about leadership development and team organizational, and it's not just skills based. It really gets down to also people's personality and fit. So we have this assumption too of it is simply the skills that we are working for, and it's really also people have different personalities, and you wouldn't put two of me in a group, right? For example, you would never want two of Shana in one group. So that leads to not just do we have the right skills and professional training, but also who has that different drive or grit or ability to follow in different needs as well. So not simply gender diversity or color diversity, but really understanding that we need a much greater, larger workforce to pull from to really make effective solutions and to protect ourselves.
Great, thanks. We tasked each group with identifying existing programs that meet the challenges, kind of those programs beyond the ones that were in the paper itself. Could you speak to some of the programs your group identified that are out there already? We'll start with Lisa.
Yes, fortunately, we have a great array of programs, and just from Fort Meade Alliance itself, if you saw the one-pagers of all the programs that they've put together and opportunities for students, we have industry partners that have contributed as guest speakers or resources of recognizing resources that they've shared with us in the classrooms with both our students and our teachers. As a matter of fact, one of our partners in that group afterwards sent an entire list of opportunities. I think the challenge of that was the discussion around the logistics of that. And that's where I think that the idea of getting a strategic plan, because the logistics of getting more children, more teachers, more industry partners into sponsor these programs or to run these clubs, co-curricular clubs, that is where we need the industry partners to bring us along, because we don't have that knowledge, but we have the willingness of our teachers, but they need that exposure themselves. So I think the many programs that are out there, we don't have the capacity right now as educators to take advantage of all of those. We're relying on our industry partners to help us to provide those opportunities. So there are many out there, but we have the logistics of trying to expose more and more children to those opportunities.
Great. Kirk?
Well, like that group, when we were focusing on how to build the experience part, there are several programs that were identified. A lot of them were led by industry, and some are even led by, the college level or the community college. Flatiron was one of the programs that was identified, and it's really training people in software development, take students and then take students and place them into full-time jobs. Amazon Web Services talked about their internal programs, such as the Amazon Propel Internship program, where they take people at entry level in high school and do internships with them. Lockheed Martin talked about their apprenticeship program they have to build the skills of their workforce. And then when we talked a little bit about increasing the pipeline, of course, the schools were talking about their internship programs, but then also the Fort Meade Alliance project scope, and how do we teach that as part of a career pathways. So as I said before, there are a lot of programs that are out there. I think it's a matter of pulling these programs together, getting a better understanding of these programs, and how do we increase these programs, increase the number of individuals that go through these programs.
Great. Shana.
Jack, if I can jump in and make a comment on Kirk's reference to Project Scope. We at the high schools are using Project Scope, and if the audience has not looked at it, it's been totally revamped by the Fort Meade Alliance, and we're using it and requiring it in our explorations courses for our signature programs. It's a wonderful tool for students, for a number of different audiences, but it is a requirement for our exploration signature courses now in all of our high schools. It's a great resource, great resource.
Jack, can I add on to that too? I mean, Project Scope is an excellent resource, and I'm glad that it's being used in the school system. We've worked with the Fort Meade Alliance to kind of come up with version 2.0 and 3.0. 2.0, we're focusing on job seekers and individuals in colleges who are starting the workforce, and for them to understand the importance of a security clearance and debunking some of those myths about security clearances. And then 3.0, we worked with transitioning service members. You would think that it's easy for someone who's been in the service working at the agency to be able to transition right into industry, but that's not true. I mean, they don't have the full life poly. So, helping them to understand that and how to go through that process. So, I do think that this is something that we need to get out more about Project Scope.
Great. Shana.
There is a wonderful program called Catalyte. It is actually a for-profit company that allows anyone to take a 2-hour test to see if they have an aptitude for software engineering, and their core focus is software engineering. They are expanding into other trainings, but Catalyte offers a free apprentice program for those that perform well on their 2-hour test that anyone can take for free. And then they transition them into training and an apprenticeship, which is overseen. And within 3 years, the people who have gone through their apprentice program, which I think is only 12 weeks, the training program is 12 weeks, the apprentice program is 3 years, they are on par performing and earning similar to all other software engineers who have gone through a 4-year degree. So I always recommend everyone go to Catalyte. Another very popular program is Howard Community College is currently working with AT&T to help them meet the needs of their workforce through apprenticeships. Similarly, UMGC has a program called Intern Plus that allows for flexible projects that provide internships and real experiences. There are some that really specialize on really specific populations. So there is a program called LBIT, which helps those on the neurodiverse spectrum for roles in the cybersecurity workforce. And similarly, we highlighted that NSA has a wonderful program for hiring those who have physical challenges such as deafness and setting them up for success in the organization. There is another one for veterans. 7 Eagle works with Fortune 1000 companies to help build the learning path for veterans and help them become interns in those large companies.
Great. So my last question is a bit of a combined question. I know that the teams came up with gaps. And I want to ask you to kind of talk about the gaps that your team came up with, but also discuss where we need to focus energy, funding, and effort, right? In other words, what solutions did your groups propose to meet those gaps and address those challenges? Kirk, we'll start with you.
Of course, a lot of our gaps were identified with substituting, making sure that people had the hands-on experience, had the experience to do the jobs. And of course, you know, one of the solutions are apprenticeships and other work and learn opportunities. So what we talked about was, how do we increase those opportunities? How do we learn what's working well and replicate those programs to ensure that we're building that skilled workforce that industry needs?
Great. Lise?
We had a number of gaps identified. Age and access, part of we're talking about high school students in this group aligning K through 12 education. So, you know, the age of a student sometimes prohibits them for having that internship in a company, in an industry setting. And the number of partners who are able to or willing to offer that to our students, there's a gap there. I mentioned before transportation. Sometimes our students are not able to get to an opportunity, and so we need to find ways around that. The virtual world has solved part of that problem, but there still needs to be a hands-on piece for that. Funding is always ongoing in public education. We know that. Building teacher capacity. We need more teachers to feel more comfortable in doing this work or being a part of this work. They have not been trained. Cyber skills, intelligence, all of those areas that are so needed now. So we need to build that teacher capacity, and the skills in academics that need to be aligned with creativity instead of just the academics. It's got to be the combination. It's got to be the collaboration. And that was the group's solution, was to continue this dialogue, to continue this collaboration with education and industry partners, and to build something that is strategic. And we are reaching out to those students that Shana was mentioning, the special education students, the spectrum students, as one of my group members brought up the other day from the community college and the work that they're doing. So it's got to be an ongoing conversation and a very strategic way of getting to those gaps and closing them.
Okay. Shana?
One of the things we thought that might help solve this gap is not just industry providing internships and apprentices, but helping industry create and define meaningful work, and perhaps having people who help from maybe external to company, so that it is not one small company trying to make up a project and another small company, that there are large collaborative efforts that are provided and of value. And so also those people get experience also in working with others and seeing, versus just an internship where you might be stuck in a small corner. So rather helping industry work together to provide a very clear internship and apprenticeship. Another one is really continuing to break down stereotypes of who is good for this industry. So there really continues not to just be programs that are available, but people are not lining up. People are self-opting out, and that continues to be a problem. It is, as the doctor said, it is not just a matter of people who are good at math. It continues to be people that are good at math or have strong potential are opting out. They are not seeing this as a viable industry for them, right? And they're taking their talent elsewhere. So we need to continue to really break down stereotypes and show the diversity of the workforce and the diversity of thought. And we need to really attract those who are mid-career, whether they are veterans or people who have opted out of the workforce to help care for others, or people who just don't like what they did, right? People who got law degrees and no longer want to be a lawyer, or they got their master's in something and think, why did I do that? And now I think I'd rather pursue this path. And we don't have a clear entry point for people who are transitioning. So we need to make that potential more obvious.
Okay, great. And that's a good segue. I've moved over to take a question from the audience. So I'm gonna have the panelists do their best to answer this question. Clearances keep coming up, but it's a rabbit hole question. Perhaps we can ask, what innovative ideas are you seeing employers undertake to help build a pipeline under the clearance environment? In other words, when you talk to your groups, were there any innovative ideas that came up to try to get folks cleared and prepare them for the cleared workforce?
I'll start with that, Jack. What we discussed was the fact that, some of the businesses who have non-cleared work, they use that as an opportunity to do internships and to build the skills of individuals while they're putting them through the clearance process. So that they're tackling two nuts at one time. One is building that experience that's required on some of this clear work, but then also getting them that security clearance at the same time. So, I think that we can look at innovative ways of doing that for businesses that have non-cleared work, or even using the scenario of using this whole cyber and IT. As Freeman mentioned, that these are all industries. This is healthcare. This is construction. Everyone. So using those industries as a way to build a pipeline of people while they're building experience, and then starting getting them clearances, so that we do have a pipeline of skilled people that meet all the labor requirements for DoD work, and then also get them that security clearance at the same time that they're building that hands-on experience.
Lisa.
Well, that is one of the barriers I mentioned before, is the age of our students, and that clearance is necessary as they go for positions later on. But having the doors of the institution open for them before they're even out of high school has been very difficult. So the students who have the internships at the NSA, which there's a wonderful experience right there that students under the age of 18 can participate in. But there is that barrier of the security and the age that our students in the high schools face. And if we can get, as Kirk mentioned, other areas of an industry that aren't necessarily clearance needed or age related experiences for our students, then I think we can start to build that pipeline. We can start to get them in the right direction, even if it's job shadowing in even earlier ages, the job shadowing and the mock interviews and the mentoring ideas and so forth, leading them into an internship, into an industry partner that has that those kinds of uncleared jobs open for them.
Shana.
I'm going to put this one back on the government, that the clearance process needs to be clearer and faster. I'm a small business, and I've been in business for 7 years working with NSA, and I've been able to clear one person. So it doesn't even matter. I have no limit of people who are very, very interested in the jobs that I have available. I am not able to take someone who has worked at another IC agency and place them up here to work. It is very, very difficult to find those positions. And it is not a lack of willingness or qualifications of people who are willing to put themselves through the process. So I would suggest actually that the government potentially allow for a greater number of clearances to be issued and processed without it having to be a perfect match of a person to a job, that we have a clearing, perhaps there is some vetting process, but the government actually pursues a process of clearing people. It would actually make rates go down too, because one of the reasons rates are so high is because it is so difficult to get in. that there's a lack of work, and so everyone is paying for that talent. But in my experience, I have not found a lack of people who are clearable, right? Good credit, no real histories. I mean, I'm not a security person, but I have plenty of people who would love to come up here and work that we have found qualified, including veterans.
Great. Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Shana. So really the last question is about, what's the best way of tackling these challenges, right? So based on your group's discussions, which approaches work best for tackling these challenges? Kirk, we'll start with you.
Well, again, the major challenge that we came up with are some of these labor categories. So I think it's working with the government agencies and looking at ways to loosen some of these labor categories and some of these requirements about years of experience and education level. And then it's also about building a pipeline of skilled workers. It's about I know I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but it should be that obvious that, building ways for people to get that hands-on experience, through internships, through apprenticeships, starting in the school system, starting in the public school system, through community colleges, through college, and increasing that pipeline. I mean, one of the things that was very exciting about this is that, you have a choice here. You can either buy your workforce or build your workforce. And through our group, it was obvious that businesses want to build their workforce. So we just need to increase those opportunities to build that workforce.
Great. Lisa?
I think it's what has been mentioned before. It needs to be ongoing. It's not a one-time opportunity for our students or for our colleagues in industry or education. We're talking about aligning education with the skills that are needed for the workforce. And that was the solution by the group, was it's got to be ongoing conversation and collaboration to solve these issues. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be let's have a workshop and all problems are solved. It's got to be a continuous improvement. That was the takeaway from the very first question, as a collaborative strategic plan on how to use the number of resources we have available in this region to the best of our education system's abilities to provide these to students and to teachers to grow that pipeline that Kirk mentioned.
Great, thanks so much. And Shana?
I think it's a three-prong approach. One is to continue to work closely with our government partners, talk to our representatives, our senators, both state and local, to influence how spending has happened. And maybe I'm optimistic, but I've been in the Hub Zone program and I've seen very closely how much working closely with some of the issues and the challenges faced do get enacted into law and make that difference. So maybe we will in the future see a collaborative apprenticeship program that small businesses can participate in. I know, for example, Maryland actually has an apprentice program where they help fund people to hire apprentices in your own company. So that's one example of working closely. Another big one is just really continuing information, right? If you're a veteran and you don't know what the path is, or you are a mid-career person and you are very interested and someone has to find the path, or even knowing about some of these programs that we did listed that are available, how do we help provide that information? So, I'm searching like mid-career, what are top jobs that I could transition into? Our information should pop up in the internet, right? Like we should be able to find that. I had another one and I forget it, but I'll come back to it. But those are two. I think we should continue to work very closely with our government. They are there to serve and collaborate us, and they are both to help the economic engine keep going and to help people be part of that economic engine. So the government really does help small business and help training. And we really need to continue the information so that people who don't know us, who are outside of what we know as the normal, are able to find an entry point and to get in.
Great. Thanks, Shayna. This has been a great discussion. Thank you all, Kirk, Lisa, Shayna. I know you put a lot of time and effort, as well as your groups, into this content. I'm now going to turn things over to Tim O'Farrell, the General Manager of FMA, to close us out.
Thank you, Jack. We'd like to thank the panelists for sharing your working group's outcomes today. On behalf of the Fort Meade Alliance, we would like to thank Dr. Rabowski, Dr. McMahon, and all of our panelists and breakout participants for their work and comments during this forum. The FMA will be using these recommendations to identify critical areas where we can support existing programs or create new programs to continue to address the challenges from the white paper and to close the gap in the cyber workforce. In the chat, Jen just dropped a link to the white paper so that you can readily access it. All the questions that came up today that were not addressed during the Q&A with Dr. Rabowski and Dr. McMahon or our panelists, we will work to address for you. Participants, if you're interested in getting involved in our efforts to build the cybersecurity workforce, we ask you to please contact the FMA's Education and Workforce Director, Jen Munt, directly. She just dropped her email into the chat as well. I would like to share that we have a few upcoming events that we want to make you aware of. First off is the return of our annual Industry Day on March 25th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. It will be virtual. We have for our keynote, Army Major General Garrett Yee from DISA, and returning again are Diane Dunshee of the NSA and Doug Packer of DISA. And we're welcoming Ms. Shiroti Picard from U.S. Cyber Command for the first time to our Industry Day. Again, that is on March 25th. And if you want to have a little fun and as well as raise some funds for the FMA Foundation, the FMA Rising Stars Virtual Bingo Night will be the March 24th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Again, it'll be a virtual night of fun and games, bingo, raising funds for the FMA Foundation. And then our next big FMA in-person event, which is our goal, is hopefully June 16th when we'll have our annual meeting at 6 p.m. More details to come obviously later. Again, we appreciate all of our participants, all of our working group members, and all of you for spending your time with us this morning. This is an important discussion, and we appreciate your attention to this critical workforce effort this region must undertake. Thank you all, and have a great morning.